Okay, this is 6.1. So we talked in the last couple sections about multiplying polynomials and dividing polynomials. And both of these concepts are going to come up in this chapter because we're going to talk about factoring, which is essentially reverse distribution. So the first thing we need to talk about is the greatest common factor of a group of integers or terms. So the greatest common factor of a group of numbers is the largest value that divides evenly into all the numbers in the group. So for example, if we have 12 and 18, we can write down all the numbers that multiply to give us 12. That's 1 and 12, 2 and 6, and 3 and 4. If we do the same with the 18, we get 1 and 18, 2 and 9, and 3 and 6. So the greatest common factor is going to be the largest number that is contained in both lists. So the largest number that is in both is the 6. So the greatest common factor there is 6. Now, when we get to variables, the greatest common factor of a group of variables of the same base is the expression with the smallest exponent. So if we look at a to the fourth b and a cubed b squared, then our greatest common factor is going to be a. Now, the smallest exponent. On the a, we have a 4 and a 3, so the smallest exponent is the 3. So that gives us an a cubed. Then for the b's, we have a b, which is to the first power, remember, we just don't write it. And we have a b squared. So the smallest exponent is the 1, so we just have a b. So our greatest common factor is a cubed b. So if we need to do the greatest common factor of a group of terms that have both numerical coefficients and variables, it's just the product of the greatest common factor of the numerical coefficient and the greatest common factor of the variable. So if we have 12 a to the fourth b and 18 a cubed b squared, we already know the greatest common factor of the 12 and the 18 is 6. And we already know the greatest common factor of the variable part is a cubed b. So the greatest common factor of 12 a to the fourth b and 18 a cubed b squared is 6 a cubed b. So let's find the greatest common factor of 5x squared y and 25x to the fourth y. So we can start by writing down everything that multiplies to give us our two coefficients. So 5, the only thing that we can multiply to get 5 is 1 and 5. For 25, we have 1 times 25, and we have 5 times 5. So our GCF of the numerical coefficient is 5. So we can put a 5 down for our GCF. Now let's talk about the variables. We have an x squared and an x to the fourth. Remember, we need the one with the smallest exponent, so that's our x squared. And we have a y to the first and a y squared, so the smallest exponent is the 1, so we have a y. So our greatest common factor is 5x squared y. Now there's one little note here. The greatest common monomial factor, which is what we've been finding here, of the terms of a polynomial is usually considered to be positive. However, sometimes it's more convenient to factor out a negative, and that's when the leading term is negative, and that just makes the math easier. So let's scroll to the next page and see how this applies to polynomials. So when we factor the greatest common factor out of a polynomial, first we identify the GCF of each of the terms in the polynomial. Then we factor out the GCF. And we do that by writing it in front of a parentheses, and then we divide each term by that GCF. So for example, if we look at 8x squared minus 8, well, they both have 8, so that's part of our GCF. And we have an x squared and an x to the first. So the smallest exponent is the 1, so our GCF comes out to be 8x. So when we factor, we have 8x, and then we take exactly what we have, 8x squared minus 8x, and we divide each of those things by 8x. And we've already practiced simplifying these. So the 8x stays out front of the parentheses. Our first term inside the parentheses, the 8's cancel each other out, and we're left with an x to the 2 minus 1. Remember the rule for dividing terms with exponents. Okay, if we look at the second term, we have the 8's cancel out again. So we have then minus, and we have an x to the 1 minus 1. So now we just simplify. We have 8x times x to the 2 minus 1 is 1, so we don't have to write that. And x to the 1 minus 1 is x to the 0. And remember, anything to the 0 power is 1. Now, how could we check this? Well, we can check by distributing and see if we get back to our original thing. So if we distribute this, we have 8x times an x, which is 8x squared, and then 8x times a negative 1, which is negative 8x. So that checks out. So we know we did the factoring right. Okay, let's try the GCF for negative 12a to the 4th b plus 18a cubed b squared. So we know that the factors for 12 are 1 and 12, 2 and 6, and 3 and 4. And we know for 18, we have 1 and 18, 2 and 6, and 3 and 4. So for the coefficient, we have a 6. So we'll put 6. And then we have a to the 4th and a cubed. Well, cubed is smaller, so a cubed. And we have a b and a b squared. So that's the b because the exponent's a 1, which is smaller. Now, this is an instance where, since our leading term has a negative in front of it, let's make our GCF have a negative. So when we do that, we have negative 6a cubed b, and we have negative 12a to the 4th b, and we're going to divide, remember, by what we're using as our GCF. Then we have plus 18a cubed b squared, and technically we're dividing that by our GCF. So, what happens? The negative 6a cubed b stays out front. When we divide in the first term, in the parentheses, negative 6 goes into negative 12 twice. So we have a 2, and then a to the 4 minus 3, and b to the 1 minus 1. Then, in the second term, 6 goes into 18 3 times, but we don't lose that negative. So we have minus 3, a to the 3 minus 3, b to the 2 minus 1. Remember our rules for dividing when we are doing exponents. So if we just clean that up, we have negative 6a cubed b times 2. A to the 4 minus 3 is a to the first. B to the 1 minus 1 is b to the 0, which is just 1. So that goes to 1. Then we have minus 3. A to the 3 minus 3 is also 0. A 0 exponent, so it's a to the 0, which remember goes to 1. And b to the 2 minus 1 is b. So we have negative 6a cubed b times, in parentheses, 2a minus 3b. And we will pick up with the other two examples, which you can try on your own if you want to, in the next video.